Thanks, Monica. All right, it's a little after 7, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Courtney. I'm with ACLS. I am one of your hosts tonight, along with Allie and a few others from NAACP, ACPS, Allegany College, Frostburg State University, among other places. We're excited to have you here tonight. For those of you just joining us, this is our 5th discussion. So some of us are more comfortable with each other than others. Welcome aboard. We've had some great discussions and we're excited to wrap up our fifth and final one for tonight. So just some general housekeeping from Allie before we get started.
Okay, so you probably saw when you entered that this is being recorded. It does go up on the ACLS YouTube, and I try to have it up within 1 to 2 days. And you can read the comments over there as well. So if you end up missing part of this, or if you know someone that missed it, you can send them the link. And I do post it on Facebook once it goes live. Please stay muted if you are not currently talking. And if you want to talk, please put in the comments or use the raise your hand feature in the participants section in order to try to talk. We don't want to try to have everyone talking at one time, and we don't want interference from microphones. So if you could do that, and for anyone who is camera shy, feel free to have discussions in the comments as well, and we will try to highlight those as we go. I don't know if I'm missing anything.
I think we got everything. Let me double check. Just once again, a reminder that this is being recorded. I did tell you that when you hopped on. And at the end of tonight, we will be sharing ways that you can get involved with the community or continue this discussion. So if you have anything in mind, you can hold that till the end or include that in the comments. Looks like we're having some issues with closed captioning. Monica, do you mind maybe working with Ashley and Allie as we begin some of the discussion, maybe as we try to figure out, troubleshoot that? We'll try to do the best we can to get that worked out. All right, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I think Alicia is going to open us up with our first discussion question.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome everyone. It's really great to be here for this 5th discussion. I am so pleased to see that the library system in Allegany County is providing this opportunity for us, even if you couldn't make every session, and I myself couldn't. I think, you know, every opportunity we have to have discussions like this, especially based on reading something together, is so valuable, especially in these times. And so I'm here to kind of help us start this conversation focused on this last section on Angela Davis, someone who continues to influence academics and activists, community organizers. You know, the way that Kendi weaves together the history with, you know, kind of an assessment of that history and brings us to present day, you know, as this book concludes, I think is really valuable. And I have some thoughts more on that, but I wanted to ask all of you first, you know, what are your initial thoughts on this last section? What stood out to you and why? And the questions again will appear in chat as well, just to help guide us. And we are just trying to think as we begin the discussion, you know, what was your reaction to this section, reading about Davis and that history, and what stood out to you and why?
Mary, if you'd like to go first.
This was a very difficult section for me. This basically traces my entire graduate education. I have a lot of the books sitting on my shelves. I have Murdahl, I have Moynihan, I have all, and I look at that. I started graduate school in the very late 60s, early 70s. All these books were on my reading list. Moynihan had actually been a member of this research center that was attached to my academic program. I had not been taught by him directly and was never terribly impressed with his work. But this was very hard for me because I realized I took in all this material and took it as gospel. Looking at it again, I can see readily how there was so much blaming the victim at this time and so much emphasis on changing Black folks and their families. And, the big issue at that time was desegregation or integration of schools. And I did a lot of research related to that. And there was a whole big discussion about what was better for Black children to be in integrated schools or what we called cultural enrichment, which was basically teach them our ways. And as I said, it was a very difficult section for me to look at in the new light that I've been able to develop over the last few months. So, but yes, we were taught all that stuff.
Could you remind people, Mary, what you studied and where, just so we have a little bit of context to how you're part of this history too?
Well, I was in a doctoral program at Harvard, specializing in sociology of education. I'm a sociology undergraduate. I gotten interested in that particular specialty because of all the emphasis on school desegregation and integration. And, that became my specialty for a very long time. I didn't end up doing my dissertation in that area. By the time I finished, the women's movement had started, and I ended up doing something about women. But I was a caring person who wanted to make things better, I guess. And I'm not sure if I did or not in those days.
Thank you for sharing openly and honestly your perception of that experience and, how things were then and your understanding of making sense of things. What now do you think? Like, what is it that you think when you reflect on that particular author or, different things you're reading in this section that you think is important right now? Like, what do we need to be thinking about right now?
Oh dear. Well, it was not an anti-racist perspective, even though I was, amongst all these liberal white men, primarily learning about this. And, but as I said, it was primarily an emphasis on changing Black people. Now, the whole integration movement had a huge effect on white people. So in that sense, it was good. But there was violence about integrating schools. There was a lot of hatred. One of the things I did at one point, I was working with a professor who was studying desegregation of schools and in the Boston area. And one of the things I did is what we call sociometric analysis of classrooms, where you literally use this technique to trace interaction among children. And, the Black children were being left out primarily. That affected me a lot at that time. I would say to you that the thing that mattered about how well they were integrated into schools was the teacher. Very much the teachers who really cared and believed in this. The whole tone in the classroom was different. They included the Black children. They intervened when there were negative kinds of interactions. But by and large, one of the problems was few interactions with the white children, just in the normal part of a classroom. Who turns to who for help and who helps somebody else. And sometimes negative comments, but not so much that as just exclusion. And I think that's changed, although it's still there, but it's not anywhere near where it was at that time. I just think our whole way of looking at things, at least for me, is very different than, basically, as I said, the emphasis on helping the Black children. Where now I'm kind of more worried about helping the white children to be more inclusive.
Thank you, Mary. Someone else want to reflect on what it is that you respond to as you read this section, as you think about what you read, what really stood out and why? I see Tom's hand.
hands.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing. And it's interesting to hear your direct personal experience. For me as well, this most recent chapter was really startling because many of the people that were quoted, or movies that were talked about, or articles that were written, were things that had occurred throughout my own childhood and my college years as well. And so I found it pretty startling. While I checked out the resources from other sources, it seemed for the most part to be true. And so it took a little while for all that to settle in and kind of acclimate to kind of that new understanding of my whole adolescence and youth and, all the way to today. So I did find that startling. I was, though, as reading it, wondering, we have such a wealth of knowledge in this group here, especially people with historical background and sociological background. Do people in this group find it to be accurate, to their their experience? When I checked out things according to other sources, it seemed like it pretty much jived with other things I read. But I was just curious if anybody else kind of did a gauge on what percentage of claims were accurate, and was there anything exaggerated or misrepresented or biased in any way? So that was kind of in the back of my mind. As much as I could, I checked the sources, and it seemed to check out 95% of the time. So that was in the back of my mind.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I know I will say, and this is a good question for everyone to think about in terms of just a literacy, kind of a question of how we're reading this and how much we count on Kendi, to be synthesizing this historical knowledge. I know I've seen critiques, of his view of history. So I think it's really about, some of doing what you're saying, which is kind of checking and learning on that, about that history in ways that helps us keep moving into other readings, other sources of information, not just this book. And it did move quickly, over some major history that sounds really reminiscent to today. A lot of similar things. I'm thinking I studied English and then communication. And I teach communication right now, and looking at the way that Black power and the way that the word Black was used in different ways, and that it, in some cases, was seen as something that was ominous, or something that was used then politically, to divide, for political gains, and how that compares to today, right? And how Black Lives Matter is read or interpreted, perceived by people. And so for me, I'm, looking at the history to understand, the things that happen, but I'm also kind of looking at the parallels. And so, I think that brings me into the current events in a way that I'm trying to test and understand, are the current sources I'm seeing accurate too, right? It's not just the historical ones and this author's interpretation, but the current sources I'm consuming to understand media, or, to understand current events, are they accurate? So it's a good question to constantly be checking ourselves on. But other thoughts on Tom's question, or your initial reaction to this section, if you'd like to expand something into something else.
So we actually have John next. Jeremy messaged me and said he's going to put his thoughts in the chat, and then Cynthia. So
Okay.
tons of thoughts.
Great, thank you, thank you. You know, what struck me when listening as a mid-1980s undergraduate studying political science, all of these reports, the Moynihan report, the Nixon era and how he ran a good government, even though we wouldn't necessarily agree with what he was doing, at least he got things done. And then in the mid-80s, the rise of Reagan, and how capitalism was touted as the be-all and end-all. It just completely disregarded this invisible privilege that we were all relying on that made that capitalism possible for some, and for those that the invisible privilege wasn't afforded to, they were all blamed for not having an equitable footing to start on.
Thanks, John. Yeah, there's a lot of that, as Mary also said, victim blaming, and also it seems like, you know, someone creating the narrative or controlling the narratives. Who did we have next, Courtney? I think
I'm next.
Cynthia?
Cynthia. There you go.
I think there are two ways to read this book. One
Can
is-
you speak up a little, Cynthia? You're really, really distant to us.
Okay, just a moment. I'll hit the clicker.
At least to me. I don't know if
Can you hear better now?
it's still kind of
It is a
distant.
little hard to hear you.
What about now?
Feel about the same.
Okay, just a moment. I'll go on to someone else and then you can come back to me.
Yeah, I mean, we could hear you, but I think it's really, really distant, and you know, I'm not sure if it's about how close you are, if there's something, a setting that you can set.
How is it now?
I mean, I can hear you, but it is far away.
Okay.
So, oh, you hit something that seemed like it brought it forth.
Okay, is it loud enough now?
Here we go.
There you
We're
go.
good, yes.
Okay, I think there are two ways you can read this book. One is to read it as a history of the Black experience during this time frame, and the other one is to read it as intellectual history. And that is to look at the ideas that have been prominent in the fight, you know, the fight over the ideas and the ideologies. So, having lived through, as many of us here, having lived through this era, one of the issues I know about, it seems to be fairly accurate. I was upset about all of the things I didn't know about, but I think there are two ways to look at it. And so I have a friend who doesn't want to read this because, oh, she said, that's the critical, you know, that critical, what is it? The critical theory that they're using. And that he's espousing, and she's missing that you can just read this and have an amazing history education.
Thank you for sharing that, because you're right. There are some different ways that, you know, and what Kendy's doing to weave things together. He's exposing things that aren't necessarily literal, you know. I mean, it's a reading of history, an interpretation of history. Other thoughts, or are we almost ready to move on to our next question?
I think we need to move on to question 2, unfortunately, but please, as I said in the chat, please feel free to continue this discussion. There are always so many great discussions going on during the Audible one. So we'll go ahead and move to question 2. Tyler?
So having a better understanding of anti-racist, assimilationist, and segregationist ideas, what do some of you think would be a modern example of these policies, stereotypes, et cetera, that would fall under these groups? Or even, since some of what he talked about are still very modern examples of these ideas, perhaps a continuation of the policies, ideas, and stereotypes that he talked about in the latter parts of this chapter.
I think Renee put a different question in the chat. There we go.
There we go. Sorry, guys. Give you guys a second to read through that. Sometimes the terms and things, you need to read it. Oh, Jeremy raised his hand. Jeremy, and it's okay, Renee.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. I tried to stop my video in case it wasn't working. But based on the question, I think what we see today, the most, I guess probably the most well-known segregationist idea right now is voting rights among Black individuals, right? Specifically, if you remember when Stacey Abrams ran for governor in Georgia, she was running against the person in Georgia who decides who gets purged off of voting rolls. So the guy who ran the election was the one she was running against. And then, of course, when you're in that situation, he purged thousands of Black voters off the voting rolls. And I think Stacey Abrams pretty much would have won had that not happened. And so that's happening. We see that it's like currently, like today, every day, because we're in the middle of an election season, that these voting laws we have in place are specifically to disenfranchise minority voters and to keep people from voting, the people who can make a real difference in this country. So I don't think there's a better example today than voting issues.
Thanks, Jeremy. Tyler?
Sorry, I always forget to unmute. So one example of segregationist ideas and segregationist policies that are in play today occur through social media algorithms. I mean, how often do we have do we have people who uncover, or even in the case of Facebook, or at times even Twitter, leading company officials admit that Black creators, Black voices are specifically segregated through the use of their algorithm. I know we have some students on here, if anyone's used TikTok some 3 months ago, there was a massive problem with Black creators being completely shadow banned off the app, where people were not able to view their content. Then with Facebook, you have anti-racist content being throttled, traffic being throttled to anti-racist websites. Segregation now has become not even an official policy in terms of politics, but rather something that is happening in culture through the use of the algorithms that create the content experiences that we experience anytime we open up any social media. It's a lot harder to see, and it's a lot more in that it's harder to point at these algorithms and say this is an instance of segregation and discrimination. It's a completely hidden hand that is driving a wedge between people, perhaps more than ever even.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Social media can definitely have a ton of things happen as far as those policies and things that are created by those algorithms. It's crazy. Sarah?
Hi. So I think the two that really stuck out to me in this section that I have felt and wrestled with are the idea of, I mean, for sure, my growing up in the 80s and, being in college in the 90s, that idea of color blindness, that was huge. That was really the thing that everybody talked about. And and feeling afterwards how that created such problematic thinking, and then seeing, Kendi's analysis of that, it just felt like, that was my experience of that several of you have spoken about, of really feeling that, and having bought into that in some way, and then seeing how it unraveled so much of the progress, really. And that, coupled with the post-racial America, we have a Black president, so therefore we can't have there's nothing that's racist that's happening anymore. That was really this kind of blanket statement. So his sense of where those two particular things came from and how they were used in this really these segregationist ideas and, kind of assimilationist at best, but certainly not anti-racist, even though that verbiage got so much better, it's so much more insidious really in the way that it becomes oppressive. So that was what really, really stuck out to me. There are so many things, but those were the ones that got me in the, oh, I lived that part.
Great. Anyone else? Oh, Suzanne, go ahead.
Sorry, give me a minute. I want to piggyback on what Sarah said, because she was talking about the 80s as being colorblind, but at the same time, we had Ronald Reagan dog whistling about welfare queens, and then we go into the 90s and the Clintons and super predators. So, all this time that we're talking about this quote unquote color blindness, there's this subtext about, which begins with the Moynihan Report. Actually, it begins in 1619 with, some sort of quasi-scientific, sociological understanding that, people from Africa are an underclass. We had the Cosby Show, and at the same time, we had our president talking about welfare queens. And I know Ronald Reagan has a lot of good sentiment in this country, but I'm telling you, he dismantled the New Deal and started started us on the path that we are now, where government supports the wealthy and leaves the struggling behind.
Thanks, Suzanne. Do we have any more thoughts regarding examples? Oh, I think I just saw Joy's hand.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joy.
Just to kind of underline what Suzanne was talking about, Ronald Reagan was the beginning of this, not that it hadn't been there before, but he basically said, I don't know how many words it is, the most feared words you can hear are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. And so the anti-government sentiment that is so strong today, no matter what, even if you're getting Social Security, didn't begin with Reagan, but it was really amped up by Reagan. And so of course that means, help. And I mean, obviously social programs can be problematic, but social programs also have helped a lot of people, including Black people, not nearly as much as white people.
Thanks, Joy. I think we have enough time for one more response, and then we'll move on to our next question. Does anyone have Any last thoughts? If you guys are interested, there is more conversation regarding Reagan in the comments. Example of war on drugs as an example, and several other takes and conversations. So feel free to chime in on that with your thoughts. We're going to go ahead and move on to question 3, which...
That's me.
Yes, that's you.
Okay, so because of that whole 80s, 90s thing I was just talking about, this is the one I picked. When discussing popular works from the 1980s and 90s, such as The Color Purple and Waiting to Exhale, Kendi writes, there has always been a razor-thin line between the racist portrayer of Black negativity and the anti-racist portrayer of imperfect Black humanity, from page 419. How are these two things different, and how does the view of the audience come into play? I think Rebecca's got her hand up. You want to go first, Rebecca?
Yeah, I don't have anything deep or incredible to say, but I think so much of this literature and movies is showing people in all their humanity. And that means good, better, worse, warts, failures, strengths, and often all in one person. So I'm not sure exactly that I don't actually get this comment. You know, I don't get this view. So maybe someone else can help me understand it better.
I think, I mean, I'm not sure, and so anybody else, please jump in. But I just to respond to that part of the question, I think he was kind of contrasting those films and those, The Color Purple also being a novel. I'm not sure about Waiting to Exhale, whether that was just a film or both. Kind of contrasting those to the previous, like the Van Peebles blaxploitation films, which had this part that was about Black power, but it's also, underlining some negative stereotypes, versus these works that were much more about that full human perspective and less about objectification and kind of a singular, much more monolithic kind of view of Black culture.
I'll maybe add in something here. I'm thinking of how it presents how difficult media is as a forum for understanding humanity. In that, there's some, like The Color Purple was a film that was, got accolades. It was based on a novel by an amazing author. Had some, people that did some really good work in portraying the roles. I can remember at the time, was early in my academic career and was looking at The Color Purple as a way of understanding issues of domestic violence, because it was so able to capture some very difficult things about humanity, and not really looking with my own privilege at what I was trying to examine, in another time and another race, and how that might differ in looking at those issues. But, it allowed me to, in some ways, compared to other forms of media or film or art, to try to explore the human condition as far as I could get. And, to really look then at how race was represented. I think, it sometimes is caricatured, unfortunately, still, in the forms that we see. But, that is itself representing humanity, which is something Rebecca said. I mean, I think that, we do in our best attempts interpretations of our reality, to construct meaning collectively and publicly, and it's imperfect, and it's going to be challenged by others, hopefully, right, through some kind of dialogic process like this, or by the people who view the film and discuss it. And I think it's important to be thinking about that, like, or is this a simple explanation or interpretation of human reality and the, issues that are part of those human experiences, or is it, one that tries to look at the complexity? And, I am not as familiar with the other film, but The Color Purple, I know, did help me in my own way start there. So to look at it again, through the light of what Kendi is saying, I think would be really valuable. And, so I don't know if I completely agree with the concern 100%, that there can be too much boiling down or characterizing of these issues of race.
Thanks, Felicia. Cynthia, and then Tom.
I'm thinking along the lines of a number of people who have posted their ideas that the difference between, is it racist or is it an honest portrayal of humans with frailties? I think it's in how the author presents it. Are the people believable? Maybe even appealing, but they have issues? Or is it just a blanket kind of representation that all people of this race behave this way?
Good thoughts, Cynthia. Tom?
I guess I want to throw in a reaction to Sarah's question about how does the view of the audience come into play. And as I look at media portrayals of African Americans, I think that, and maybe it's just because my memory is a little more short term, but movies more recently have helped me to understand the Black experience more. Say over the past 10 years, the movies that have been made, and even going back to the Cosby Show, and I was surprised that Oprah Winfrey wasn't mentioned in this book at all. But my wife is a big Oprah fan, and I watched a lot of Oprah, and I think that just understanding her experience too more helped me to just understand the Black experience more. So the audience's view coming into play, and that I had a very limited view growing up, and it probably wasn't until I got to college that I really had more contact with people of minorities and minority cultures. So I think movies helped me to understand that perspective more.
Thanks, Tom. We have a couple thoughts in here from John. How behavior of one individual represents the whole race, perhaps. Allie says, I think the audience comes into play as to how they take the showing of human imperfections of a Black person. Do they take it as all Black people act that way, or do they recognize that just that person acts that way? These are all good thoughts regarding this question. We probably have enough time for one or two more responses. Does anyone who isn't camera shy like to add on to some of these thoughts?
So I'll round it out in case nobody else has one for this. The comment about particularly the sort of racist idea that one, or that each individual person somehow represents the group, which is not something that we think about when we think about white people. You can watch a film full of white people who are like living in a manor in England, and you never think for 1 second that their behavior is representative of like all white people. It's not something that you think. But yes, in all of these films, it's that question, is this about the humanity of these individual characters, or is this representative of what Black people are like? I think that's the kind of point that he's driving at there, that even in kind of the best representations of a well-rounded, fully formed human, there's still this kind of this piece that's coming back to the audience of, does this really represent or what to what degree is it, or is this, just about this story? And I think it's something that we all still struggle with. I think that that's because in part there are so few still, like we talked about a couple times ago about like the Black Panther film, and then there's just really a limited kind of pool of films that have largely African American casts, and so I think we're still not quite there yet to be able to answer this question really clearly in the way that we're thinking about these films versus films even with all white casts. So that's my last comment on that one. We can turn it over.
All right, we're gonna hop on to our next question. Jeremy.
Okay, let me see here. I'll pull it up. Now that we've read all of these sections, what is your thought on why they were highlighted by Kendi? Who would you add and why? I know when I was thinking about this question, I remember that we had a whole section that was renamed Thomas Jefferson, and I almost thought like it would be better to have just that section be the founding fathers in general. I think it'd be interesting to just have him go into Thomas Jefferson, who I think we know pretty much about, but like also George Washington, who had a ton of slaves, and by all accounts, his plantation and stuff like where he in Mount Vernon was one of the worst places you could work. And Courtney and I just went to Mount Vernon recently and was reading all about that, and I think a lot of stuff that I didn't know about George Washington that I think would be a great thing for him to focus on in this book. I also think if Kendi was to re-release the book, he would probably add a huge section about everything that's happened since 2016 when he released the book, because a lot's happened, particularly with Black Lives Matter and the current presidency and the election, all that stuff. I think he would have enough material probably for a whole nother section just based on the 4 years since he released Stanford in the beginning.
Thanks, Jeremy. So one of the people, and I heard Tom mention it, Oprah. We didn't hear anything about Oprah. Who else? Who are people that maybe you would have expected to read in this book? Expect Dr. Kendi to highlight, perhaps in this history of racism and perhaps experiences that maybe that you just would expect to kind of see pop up. Anita Hill, yeah. Motown. August Wilson. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Yeah, I imagine that he will definitely be adding either a rewritten version or a part 2, or I don't know what, adding with everything that has gone on recently, as Jeremy said.
I think I was kind of surprised that even though we talked about Abe Lincoln and we talked about Martin Luther King, that they weren't like the section headers. I think those are the main ones that white people think about. So I guess that even though the sections kind of seem to talk mostly about them, they weren't like the headliners.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but how do you fit, this is a huge huge book. This is
Yes.
covering all this history of racism, trying to take back all the whitewashing and not, not necessarily take it back, but try to tell the tale. And how can you do that? This needs to be a multi-volume tome if you're going to do that.
Yeah, mine's
This
very,
doesn't cover all of it.
mine has quite the notes in it, so I went through 10 packs of tabs.
Yeah. Could I say mine's not that heavy, thank goodness. But you know what? I did not, in fact, I didn't finish Angela Davis. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I actually also downloaded on my Kindle the Stamp from the Beginning for Youth, because I thought I've got to have something to help me get through these humongous chapters in time. And like I read the whole Angela Davis thing there. I had started it in the original and got about a third of the way through. And then today I went and read the whole thing in the youth version. And it's actually really interesting writing. But what I was going to say is I'm just now looking at the book and didn't get to the epilogue at all. But it almost looks like in the epilogue, he is starting that next, these things that some of the things we're talking about that, today he would need to continue and get more into current events and all. And it looks like he actually is doing that in a sense. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, Suzanne, you can hop on. Absolutely.
I just want to bring this
And
up
yes, Sarah,
quickly, if that's okay.
Mhm.
At an educational institution, as I'm sure many people here do as well. And recently, President Trump has put out an executive order that most of the ideas that are discussed in this book cannot be used in any organization, nonprofit, the military, education that receives federal funding. The word anti-racist, critical race theory. There's another one that's really benign. Sorry, I'm old. It went past my head, but the ideas that we are talking about right now are literally banned by our president from any institution, entity that receives federal funds. 2 points. One is that our taxpayer dollars are being spent by federal workers trolling websites of educational institutions and nonprofits and the military to look for these keywords that are banned. And the Department of Labor has opened up a hotline for aggrieved or egreged, I'm not sure what the right word is, workers who feel that they have somehow been exposed to anti-racist, critical race theories in their workplaces. This is real. This is going on right now. I just want everybody to know. Vote, vote, vote.
No, you're right. And it's terrifying and also numbing, I guess, in that it's hard to believe because, I'm working at FSU and, it's still, it's just part of what I teach, what I learn, what I try to help others increase their literacy and have conversations about. And guess I'm in a bit of disbelief, but it's there, right there on the website. And it's almost like there's, that suspension of belief that it's going to really be applied. And so I'm curious to see what happens, in terms of the election outcomes and what would happen, if it starts to, people are held accountable in terms of funding, and so the hope is, yes, again, we vote to make sure democracy, is best supported so that we're not under those constraints.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Suzanne. I'm sure you guys are seeing in the comments some response to that, as well as bringing up Dr. Kennedy referred to Tony K. Pembera and Audre Lorde, who are both powerful writers. You guys can check them out in the local library, of course. And just how current at a lot of the things that the Black community members were asking for on page 397 are things that, you know, we're still fighting for today. Absolutely. Thank you guys for sharing and keeping that comment section alive. We're going to go ahead and we have time for one more response if you guys would like. If not, we'll move on to our next question. I'll give just a few moments if anyone is interested. All right, we'll go ahead and move to our next question, which is going to be led by Tom.
Thank you. I just put my question in the public chat as well, but I'll read it. And it says, Kennedy writes, in quotes, "The history of racist ideas tells us what strategies anti-racists should stop using. Stamped from the beginning chronicles not just the development of racist ideas, but the ongoing failure of the three oldest and most popular strategies Americans have used to root out these ideas: self-sacrifice, uplift suasion, and educational persuasion. Do you agree or disagree that these three strategies have been failures and that anti-racists should stop using them? If you agree, provide evidence from your prior knowledge or outside experience. And if you disagree, provide evidence from your prior knowledge or outside experience." Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Tom. So this was submitted after the email was sent out. So this is a new question that was added. So I'll give you guys kind of a moment or two. Oh, it kind of does, Suzanne. It does kind of feel a little final exam question-y, but there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll give you guys a moment to read through that in the section, because at least for me, listening doesn't always work. I have to read it to comprehend sometimes when thinking about such deep conversations that we're having today. Rebecca, would like to share your thoughts?
Well, just offhand, the problem is all those things work to some extent. You know, the type of encouragement that they are can be used with anybody. You know, all of us can be encouraged to try harder. All of us can be, and I'm already forgetting, I'm not looking at the question now, at the different points. But the thing is, none of those is evil in themselves. It's when they're forced on a group and saying, this is how you need to lift yourself up. Show us how you're going to do it. You see what I'm saying? That's all.
It's true, Suzanne. We're not all up against systemic racism.
So I'll jump in with that, because of course educational persuasion is the one that just personally I'm involved in. It's part of why we're here right now, from my piece of things. And so I think what's challenging about this one, that really there's some extensive discussion in that last section about it, is or at least in it really gets into it in the epilogue, maybe it's the epilogue a little bit more even, is this part where for educational persuasion to work, we have to assume that people are going to be persuaded by facts. And when we are in an environment where facts are questionable, and it's not, that's not even just our current reality. This traces this back all the way through, you know, these like scientific facts that were touted for, you know, for these 400 years that were incorrect. So it's very difficult to find your footing there, you know, when it is that there are times to legitimately question facts. And so now in our current reality, we're in a swirl of where, you know, a very unmoored sense of what is factual reality. And so I think that that's where that educational persuasion really is, that's the challenge, is to establish fact, you know, get everybody on the same page as to what are facts, and then you can take a next step. But when that part is difficult, it's certainly difficult to really utilize that as a tool for big changes.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I realized my mic wasn't on. I nodded in agreement to Allie's response. I think women to some degree know that these things don't work that well. Are there any other thoughts? It is a big question to unpack, multi-leveled with the various ideas of self-sacrifice, that persuasion, the educational persuasion. Maybe you'd like to just touch on one of those, not all of them. Oh, Tom.
I guess just to respond to my own question, the reason I asked it is because I think that those three things are the things that have had the greatest influence on my own current viewpoint. And so when they were kind of discounted, I felt like, it didn't seem to jive with my life experience, because that's persuasion, and even being in this class, educational persuasion had a significant influence. And I know that he mentions economic opportunities are what really is going to make a difference. And I guess if I was ever in a position to make those political decisions as a leader, I would draw upon these experiences to then make those decisions. So I think they have been important.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there about that piece where these are like a piece of the puzzle, as opposed to that real end game, which is in a capitalistic society, it's about capital. So until we can get to a place where that is distributed more evenly, then these continue to be a first stepping stone kind of piece. So yeah, I think that's a great way to tie all those things together.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Sarah. Oh, Mary.
I was kind of discouraged at the end, that basically what he says is the way we're going to change things is that Blacks and other anti-racists need to take control of government, of economy, you know, all the important power positions. And that's a huge goal. I just don't know. You know, we're having trouble possibly even having a liberal president, moderately liberal president. How in the world are we ever going to reach that other goal? There's a whole lot of people who don't agree. with any of these ideas, and I find that very scary. I'm getting too old for all this scary stuff, and not the way I wanted to live out my life as it comes towards the end. And that's just an overwhelming goal to me, a wonderful goal, but I just don't see how it will happen. So that's my kind of letdown at the end. He's right, but I don't see how it will happen.
Vote, vote, vote. And Suzanne does say demographics are on the side of the anti-racism, but it is a long game, and there's a long-lasting effect that racist ideas and structures, sometimes it'll take a long time to tear back down those structures that are created. So we'll go ahead and move on to John's question for tonight, because this will give us plenty of time to discuss some local going-ons and ways that you guys can get involved.
Okay. Kendi quotes Angela Davis: "In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. Now that we have read and discussed this book together, what are your next steps to make constructive changes happen personally and with others through the library and in the community now? What habits and actions can you implement to promote anti-racism? In addition to using your votes wisely, what can we do to ensure that anti-racist people get the power they need to enact change?"
All right, this is another big one, but it is a call to action. So what are your thoughts as to how, what habits and actions can we do to implement and promote that anti-racism, as John said? It could be small, what are you going to do? Or larger, what we need to do as a collective whole. So, and of course, this can be personal as well. Suzanne, give to organizations that support anti-racism in your community. Absolutely. Vote. Yes. Seek out truth. Stand up to power and be courageous enough to get involved with social movements that are working towards change. Stand up to that racist uncle. Get involved in the NAACP. Great. Show up when being asked to be an ally. Absolutely. These are all great suggestions on how to get involved. John.
I was just going to say that one of the things I want to work on is to create the environment within the organizations I'm involved in, so that if a person of color or a Black person or a minority can get involved in that organization, that they're in an environment where they can succeed, that things aren't necessarily lined up against them automatically.
Truly being an ally in all you do, for sure. Organizations and things.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, it's about resisting, that these things like these executive orders. I mean, I was just looking it up online about that executive order. So if you do search anti-racist executive order, White House, you'll see, and they try to make it sound like it's something that's good because, well, we do have this history that we've dealt with, and it's in the past that we dealt with it. And then I also saw, the state of California is disregarding that they're going to have federal funding cut, and so that kind of resistance, and the more collective that resistance can be, the better. So, it's not just, I think, individually acting, but really looking at ways you can join groups and have groups become coalitions, that there's not the fragmentation that makes it harder to resist, to create the real change, that's needed.
Betsy?
Yeah, I kind of typed it in, but Kendi talks about a measure of racist policy is disparate impact. So a lot of these ideas, and this is where I love what he has to say so much, because I feel that he is so, he's not willing to damn everybody. You know, he realizes that people try, but just because you try doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. And, you know, he outlines some of those, like being colorblind. I don't have a bad feeling about the 80s not seeing color, because I think it was a genuine attempt. It didn't work out well, but I don't think there was any malice intended. Some of the stuff, plenty of the stuff has malice intended. But what I have found is that any organization of which you're a member, if you look around the table and there are not people of color, why aren't there? Why aren't there? Get rid of that. There should be people of color around every table, in every room. And if there aren't, be an anti-racist.
Thanks, Betsy. It's good to question for sure. You know, why aren't we seeing diversity at our tables, on our boards, in our organizations, and how can we change that? Yeah, Marianne, speaking of the long game, we somehow need to work to dismantle some of the institutions so deeply rooted in racism, such as the Electoral College, DC not having representation in the Senate. This will not be easy changes to make, but until we get actual representation in government, it's more difficult to change other policies, for sure. It's hard when you have whole populations that aren't getting that representation. Yeah, Cynthia, individual actions of good are not going to make enough difference. So what do we need to do to make that difference? Oh, we have Tom, and meanwhile we have conversations still going on in that chat.
I'm sorry, I'll probably make this, I made a few comments today, but John asks, what habits and actions can you implement to promote anti-racism? I know this is a bit of a big goal, but visiting Africa can make a big difference. I was in Uganda about 12 years ago, and I spent 2 weeks with amazing African people that were so full of joy and hope and faith, and just amazingly empowered individuals. And they changed my life. And I still remember those people and know those people. And coming back, I look at African Americans now, understanding their heritage more and understanding the reality of their humanity more. And so it's a big one, but having the opportunity to really directly experience and meet with real African people can be life-changing and view-changing.
Thanks, Tom.
If I can just comment on that, Tom, you said that, you know, it took you meeting real African people to do that. And I mean, I feel kind of sad that it took that to, you know, see this, because there are a lot of people who don't know their own heritage and who don't get to experience that themselves. And I mean, you have real African people around you all the time. So, I mean, I understand that a lot of people feel that way as well. You know, sometimes it takes seeing a different culture in order to understand things better, but it is sad that it has to take that sometimes.
We, of course, have more recommendations in the chat of physical ways you can get involved. At the last vigil coming up, Healing the Heart of Democracy through FSU on Tuesday, November 10th, 6 p.m. Of course, getting involved with the local NAACP branch, Healing and Reparations. There are all so many great suggestions. Does anyone have any other suggestions? Maybe something you'd like to do personally? For me, for the library as an organization, we are discussing about doing another book discussion this spring. More to come. I don't have details yet. So we can continue to have that discussion and dialogue because that is part of our mission to have that conversation and things like that. And then for me is personally getting involved more. I strive to be non-political, but this is not politics. This is real life things happening to people. So sometimes we have to take a look at that. You're not hurting that family member from being political. You're defending life and friends who might not have representation. Yep, Tyler sharing, as he did on our last discussion about the new campus branch of the NAACP. Please feel free to share if you're interested in joining that. They need a few more members to create that branch.
I was going to say the event, it wouldn't copy and paste everything, so that's why it's in 2 segments, but there's a registration link for a Zoom event that you'll register and then the email comes back to you with the link to join the event. And the idea behind this is not just a talk. I mean, that's a starting point for organizing for action, so that particular event is a follow-up to a discussion we had before the election that included basic skills to calm yourself, breathing exercises that were learned through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, as well as voter registration information. So we're trying to share information that helps us to do the individual actions that we need to show up and take care of ourselves. But then when we come together, and we came together 5 times, right, for this book discussion, and we come together in meetings regularly, and for more discussions, we build relationships and we build trust. And then that collective action, or that coalition that we can build across the different efforts or groups we're part of will come. And I think that's that long-term effort over time is what's needed. It's not going to happen immediately. It's not like one event is going to fix everything, right? Or create the plan that's going to change it all. It's that long-term commitment to be showing up and building those relationships and that trust to collect our energies and make things, move in a new direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one quick thing to add, because I know that not everybody, I'm sure that not everybody has finished reading the epilogue, but as difficult as it feels that, this is a lot of super heavy stuff. And I think that for sure the ending piece feels like, oh, we have such a long way to go. But his very last paragraph, I feel like, was incredibly uplifting. And it's super short, so I'm just going to read it in case for folks who haven't gotten there yet. So he says, he's discussing this piece about anti-racists really needing to have power in order to truly change things. But the final paragraph is, and that day is sure to come. No power lasts forever. There will come a time when Americans will realize that the only thing wrong with Black people is that they think something is wrong with Black people. There will come a time when racist ideas will no longer obstruct us from seeing the complete and utter abnormality of racial disparities. There will come a time when we will love humanity, when we will gain the courage to fight for an equitable society for our beloved humanity, knowing intelligently that when we fight for humanity, we are fighting for ourselves. There will come a time, maybe, just maybe, that time is now. So I feel like that, you know, that was a little, it was warm. It was warm at the end. He's not leaving us with nothing.
Took a whole book, but there's hope. There's always hope. So if there's anything we can leave you guys with, read that epilogue. Despite all the negative things we've read, there is hope and there's a good future ahead of us. Courage, as Alicia says, so important right now. Absolutely. Collective courage, especially during a pandemic, during crazy times. You know, we still have hope. We can still meet digitally and discuss and have great conversations like this and continue dialoguing and doing wonderful, amazing things. So, as I said, this is opened up to the floor. If you'd like to share anything exciting that's going on to close out our discussion for tonight, any ways people can get involved. I know it's been a chat. Yes, let's put the epilogue at the end of our email signatures. That would be perfect. Everyone will know who attended the stamp discussion file. All right, Rebecca.
I just think we all thank you, I started to say alligator staff, you library staff, for all you've done. This is, you've done a fabulous job. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you all for joining us and having such a great discussion. So important to continue to have this dialogue, and it wouldn't be possible without everybody here adding their thoughts and continuing. All right. All right. We'll give just another couple seconds if anyone would like to share their thoughts, but we are getting ready to close up. Feel free to keep that chat going for the next minute or so. Just a reminder, this was being recorded. We appreciate, thank you to everybody who joined us during this journey the past 10 weeks. It's crazy, it's bi-weekly. It's been a great discussion and we've loved having you guys. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And just a reminder on the recording, you will be able to read the comments as well. It's usually linked in the description. And any links that are being posted in the comments will also be on the video description. So if you are looking for any of those to read later, they will be on there.
And of course, stay tuned for our next discussion. More information coming soon for springtime. So thank you all again. Hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.